a little background regarding the Defenders of Freedom project. First of all, this is the greatest generation. Tom Brokaw said as much. And within our area here of Chautauqua and Cattaraugus County is in fact some of the real heroes as they gave up their lives, their early lives, the lives where while you are at college, they're out there in the field, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Pacific, really for a cause of which we enjoy today, this freedom. And we can't say enough about them generally, and specifically we're thrilled to have here to my far left, Lester Bishop. Lester Bishop is from Little Valley, New York, and we're going to get into his biography through their words shortly. And next in the middle is Dick Anson. Dick Anson's from the Dunkirk area here. Continues to stay active, goes to work every morning. In fact, if we didn't steal him right now, he'd probably be at the shop. So, Dick, we're glad you're here. And Doug Manley's a legend. Doug has done much here, lives in Fredonia. Now has been active in the SUNY Fredonia system. And that smile on his face, and he's an Irishman. We'll probably hear an Irish story or two.
Let us hope we do.
Yeah. And so that's my job, is to kind of work that out. The Defenders of Freedom program, which has been really going since December 7th, 2014, we interviewed over 100 individuals. Many of them are online. All three of them are YouTube heroes. They're rock stars. We take their interviews and edit them, and then try to find footage which might go with their time and place in history. And frankly, I was watching all three of yours on the way up there. We did little vignettes of it, so I could refresh my recollection of what all three of you did.
Phil was driving, not Greg.
I wouldn't have stopped.
Good. Yeah. No.
So, and it would, as a practical matter along those lines, Matt's here today. Matt, did you introduce him?
No, unfortunately, I did not introduce
Who's
Matt.
in charge of this program?
Whoever's in charge of the program did screw up. We'll have to talk to him afterwards. Matt is one of the interns we've had at the Jackson Center. We've had two from Fredonia, Abby Blinn being the other one, both of whom have done an excellent job writing articles, working with us, writing articles that we've managed to place in national media, highlighting some of our World War II veterans. Matt was very helpful to me the last couple of days, helping me around campus, making sure I got to the right building at the right time, providing the necessary adult supervision, as we know, for me. It would have been helpful had he given me a few hints on doing the intro today, too, to make sure that his name was included.
Part of what SUNY Fredonia has been providing us with assistance, we've had a great relationship. The Robert Jackson Center is with SUNY Fredonia, and through the various departments have providing internship programs, exposure to what's going on at the center. And in fact, 10 years ago, the SUNY Fredonia had an opportunity to do with the Jackson Center, a commemorative 60th anniversary of the Nuremberg trial, where we were able to bring members who were involved in the trial to Chautauqua Institution to discuss the issues regarding the Nuremberg trial and its legacy. And so SUNY Fredonia, very much part of that world, especially its political science and history department, and that worked out incredibly well. It's online, you can watch it, of some of the people. And as Doug will certainly remember, we had a great interview with Richard Sonnenfeld, who was one of the Nuremberg translators who actually was up close and personal to all the Nuremberg defendants. Now why am I over here talking about that? Because that's part of our mission at the Jackson Center, but that also the Nuremberg trial. The Nuremberg trial, which we're commemorating the 70th anniversary. In fact, Susan and I just came back from Nuremberg, where we celebrated it in the Palace of Justice, which was terrific. In fact, the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch, flew over to Nuremberg just to be with us, to give it celebrity, to give it noteworthiness, but it was a great thrill for us. But the Nuremberg trial was the bookend of World War II. That was it. So that was the opportunity to try those perpetrators who instigated what became known as World War II. What happened, to document it so it would never happen again. Our three guests, and I mean them in the highest esteem, were those who took up the mantle on behalf of the United States to fight those perpetrators so that we could, in fact, be victorious, to understand our degree of independence that we enjoy today. And that really is the connect. From the Jackson Center, it's a logical thing for us to do, is to pause, to reflect, to gather the stories. And to gather the stories and to put them in a unique perspective and on the social media of the day, YouTube. So we're thrilled to have them. And so I'm going to start the questioning, and I'll try to project. If you can't hear me, just say, do December 7th, 1941. And we're just going to go down our panelists. And Lester, in the Salamanca, Little Valley area, what do you remember about December 7th, 1941? And you can talk out to the crowd, so you don't have to look at me. You can just kind of talk to them.
Yeah, at that particular time in my life, I was working for Bell Aircraft Corporation in Buffalo. And it was on a Sunday. I didn't have to go to work until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And where I lived, I rented a room in a private home. I ate all my meals out, just slept there. Anyway, everything was fine until the radio began to blast after a while about December 7th, about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And then everybody began, of course, the war clouds had been gathering, you know, for a year or more, so it wasn't unexpected in a way. But anyway, that was the beginning. That's what I remember about December 7th, is listening to the radio and everything that was going on. It was a mumble jumble. Nobody understood really what was going on, but anyway, that was the beginning, and that was the day I spent listening to the radio and going to work at Bell Aircraft at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, was there any buzz in the Bell Aircraft? I mean, here is, in fact, you're making potentially warplanes there.
Yeah, Bell made the P-39 fighter plane, and Curtiss built a P-40, sitting in Buffalo at the same time. Now, the 39 wasn't the best fighter plane in the world. One thing they had was a 37 millimeter cannon, you might call it, or anyway, shot a shell about this big around, right through the propeller shaft. And the engine was behind the pilot, which made a long propeller shaft there, and that's where the 37 fired right through the propeller shaft. And a lot of those B-39 went to Russia, and Americans didn't fly very many of them, a few in the Pacific. In the European theater, there were the later models of P-51 and P-47, and which were good airplanes, and a lot better than the 39 or the B-40. But a few B-40s flew out of Italy with the Tuskegee Air Force. Oh, entirely black person, the best pilots in the world. And anyway, but that was the beginning. You know, there's a sad story, but a happy ending.
Dick, you were Dunkirk, at Dunkirk High School, and what did you recall about December 7th, 1941?
My parents and I got into a car to visit my oldest sister, which was married. I was at that point, I believe, a sophomore in high school. And we were in the car on the road to make this visit, which was Lancaster, New York, 50 miles away. And the news came on over the car radio when it happened. And that's how I was exposed to it. And of course, the commentator of the news, all he could say is that the Pearl Harbor was attacked, and it was going to be the beginning of a wartime atmosphere going forward. And of course, my parents were very much concerned. But that's how I was introduced to the bombing Pearl Harbor on December 7th.
Doug?
I was 13 at the time. I turned 14 shortly thereafter. And I went to a basketball game with my father in Rochester. And they kept interrupting and giving more announcements as they understood about it. And I remember the one thing about it, my father turned to me and said, "Well, thank God you're too young to go."
I'm going to go backwards now, Doug. In the community, the next couple of days, do you recall at 13, 14, was there much of a buzz as to how this might impact, or was it kind of an isolated incident that occurred in the Pacific?
No, it began to show up in many ways. Rationing started. Almost everything that you ate was rationed. We stopped making cars. We stopped making anything that could be, any factory that could be turned over to making war gear was being changed over, all within the first year. That was, we had people who went out, were taught to be aircraft recognizers. Yeah, the ridiculous part was in Rochester, New York. The chances of the Japanese bombing us was pretty remote, to say the least. But I can remember that I worked on the farms in the summer, and high school students immediately began to become the harvesters and so on. Later, when I got to be 16, I got a chauffeur's license, and I was driving produce into the processing market, and most of the stuff that was being processed in the local processing plants in the area was producing product that was going to be turned into product for the armed services. And so it was an immediate effect.
So really it really didn't impact me at that age. I think I was a sophomore in high school. At that age, you got other interests as a young guy. part of the ally activity that's going to fight the war. So.
That's one thing that they used to have blackouts. Yeah. The first thing you did was call up your girlfriend and find out when they were having it. And you could sure be at the house at the right time.
This is now rated PG. Lester, and then your neck of the woods, Salamanca. What was it like the right after the radio announcement? You hear Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. What was the immediacy of reaction in the area?
I don't really remember. I know after I said I went to work, of course, there was everybody was talking about it, of course, but what to expect, we didn't know, really. And it was bad news. That's about the most I can say for it, I guess. And I don't know, just everybody was excited or worried. A lot of people that had kids in the service were particularly worried, of course, and I wasn't quite old enough yet, but soon was. Anyway, just working at Bell Aircraft there, everybody was talking about it naturally, and I wondered what was going to happen down the road a little ways. Just bad news, period.
So you were born in 1922, right, Lester?
Yeah, 22, yeah.
Yeah. So you're 19 at that time, and
Well, minimum age for induction at that time was 21, and eventually, before I was 21, it got down to 18, and I'd go home on weekends, but at first we only worked 5 days a week for a while. Anyway, go home on weekends, and the young guys had disappeared, a lot of them. Anyway, I went to talk to a big shot there at Bell Aircraft that hired. He was a retired colonel from the Armed Forces, and to find out what was going on, I had reported to my induction center. Anyway, he told me that they had got me a 6-month deferment. I was classed as essential personnel, you know, I was a very important person. Picture head this big. Anyway, so I got, after 6 months, I worried some more. And finally I got news, and that I had been inducted, had a report to induction center, and on the 3rd of August 1943. And after that was induction center, and after passed the physical, induction center in Camp Upton, Long Island, and interviewed. Oh, Long Island, that was interesting. You got 300 GIs. Well, they were just ordinary, everyday young kids, you know, young guys, going in this great, big, long building. And there was all 300 individuals. Well, the first thing you got was a GI haircut. Man, the hair was this deep on the floor. And,
How you feeling, guys?
And you got shots from 2 or 3 shots in each arm, and for this, that, and the other thing, and the vaccination. And then you got shoes, 2 sizes too large. Your clothes you put in a box. You got GI uniforms. You come out at that other end of that building, there are 300 just exactly alike, all dressed in khakis. It was quite, that part was quite interesting. 300 separate individuals went in one end, they were all alike coming out the other. But anyway, from there, induction center, I went through basic training and then on to gunnery school, and finally I got out of gunnery school in February 1944. Yeah. Then I went to Rome, New York, and was assigned to a bomber crew, along with 9 other guys. There's 10 guys in each bomber crew. And pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, and anyway, 4 officers and 6 enlisted men. And from there on, it was no fun.
Before we get into your full story, Lester, I'm going to pause there because you've now gone through basic training,
Yeah.
and I want to get their stories as well. You know, Dick, you were here in Dunkirk, and at some point in your academic career, you have to make a choice also. And I'm curious, you got the choice of waiting till you get a letter that says greetings.
I got a, what was that last part?
Well, I was just asking Dick Anson here, you know, about getting a letter that might be from, says greetings, or you can enlist, you know, type of thing. So,
I didn't understand that.
yeah. Matt,
Don't too loud, just slow.
He's going to ask Dick a question now.
In what?
He's asking Dick a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to ask Dick a question.
I'll get you statistics of what you had to go through.
Well, I knew I had, in my senior year in high school, I was graduating when I was 17 years old. And so, not immediately, but that was in June. My 18th birthday was in October. So as soon as I hit 18, I didn't want to be drafted, so I but I visited a recruitment center for the Marine Corps. And I said, look, I'm ready to go in, but can I delay this for about a month to get my domestics organized? And they said, sure. But anyway, by the end of the year, I was in the Marine Corps by choice. And that's where I started.
You decided to go in the Marine Corps by choice. What was the thinking behind whether you wanted to go into the Navy or the Army or the Marines?
I just felt that the Marine Corps was probably a little more efficient, more effective, and I thought I would want to be with an organization of that nature than just something else. I mean, that, for some reason, that the Marine Corps highlighted my interests. Why as I told you, from their past history, I just liked what they've done in the past, and I said, well, I want to be part of that activity. And that's how I chose to make the Marine Corps.
So you went off to Paris Island?
Paris Island was the boot camp. And then Camp Lejeune, and then Camp Pendleton, and in the Pacific.
You were exposed or at someplace along the boot camp process to segregation. Here you're a kid from Dunkirk, New York, probably never traveled much beyond Dunkirk, and then all of a sudden you are exposed to blacks, then known as Negroes, and how they were treated. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think kind of a shocking surprise to me was that on my way to Paris Island, it was a train ride. You got on a train, and then the train dropped you off in somewhere in North Carolina. I can't remember, this specific city. So I walked in the depot, we only call it, got off the train. And the first thing I noticed is that restrooms colored and the restrooms white. They were divided. If you were white, you didn't belong in a black restroom, and vice versa. And that took me by total surprise. What is this? I was never exposed to it up north either, and nobody talked much about it. So that was. Yeah, that was an exposure I didn't really expect to see.
I assume that was taken just as a matter of fact. I mean, there was no, other than...
No, it was a way of life there. And, not being exposed to that way of life, it took me by surprise.
Doug, for you, you're a little bit younger, and at some point, though, you too had that same choice of waiting for the letter or enlisting.
Well, I enlisted I graduated from high school in June, and I volunteered.
June of what year?
High school, and then I decided that I wanted to enlist. You could enlist at 17 if you had parental permission. And I had not lived at home since I was a sophomore in high school, because my dad had moved out of town, and I didn't want to change schools, so I worked my way through high school. And when the time came that I could enlist, my mother was maybe glad to get rid of me, I'm not sure.
We've got time if you want to talk about it.
But so I was in the Navy a month after I was out of high school. I immediately went to Geneva, New York, to Sampson Naval Base, which was after the war became an Air Force base, and after that it became an insane asylum, and there really wasn't that much difference. But boot camp was only 8 weeks in those times, and they taught you to speak Navy language, to wear Navy clothes, and to be exposed to some of the things you might have in combat. You had an exercise with going into burning buildings, because in the Navy that was not unusual on board a ship. Gas, tear gas, and that sort of thing, how to behave with that. Mostly it was physical and drilling to get you into physical shape. One of the interesting things about it, we were in units, the unit above us in the barracks were all young men from Maine, and they all had dental problems, and because you couldn't be operated or worked on board ship, there were no guarantees that you would have that kind of treatment. They just took these guys in and pulled all their teeth and gave them, because they would not have been able to take advantage of, they couldn't be treated, is all I'm trying to say. So, and I then went on to gunfire control school in San Diego, which was 12 weeks, and that was working primarily with what were computers in those days, electromechanical rather than electronic, and they were used for aiming and pointing the guns on ships. And so after receiving that 12 weeks of training, I had a week of liberty, and then went up and was put aboard a troop ship in San Francisco Bay, and traveled out to Ulithi Atoll, which I can't find on a map even today. But that we were transferred aboard. I was transferred aboard a ship to replace somebody who was going back, and all of a sudden I was off Okinawa, where he was, and that's the end of the story for now. That's how I got out there.
So you're in the Pacific, both you and Dick are in the Pacific at that point in time. Lester is on his way to Europe. So we're going to pick up your story, Lester, about you got through boot camp,
Yeah?
and the rest, I remember you saying, gets pretty difficult after that. And one of the things that you did was you were in the Air Force.
Right.
So, as a well-trained U.S. Army Air Corps person,
Yeah?
what was your next step? How did you get over to Europe?
Oh, the last time was the OTU place in Savannah, Georgia. We'd been assigned a cruise, the 10 of us, and did our overseas training out of Chatham Air Force Base in Savannah. We had a lot of lectures on what we might expect, and this and that and the other. We left there sometime in June, I think it was, and flew in a B-24, which is a 4-engine bomber, similar to the P-17. The P-17 is not more popular. Anyway, we flew at 24, and went right by it, flew around the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, which was bad news, could have been bad news. But the pilot there, we thought we wanted to see it, and so we did. We flew around the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor on our way to an air base in New Hampshire. And my pilot also had a brother, a little bit younger, that was also a first pilot. And the two crews that traveled together, they had several times, and finally decided they'd send us to drop a few eggs over in Germany, but that was the bad part, the bad news part. And on the 13th day of August, if anybody here in the service was in Europe, all you got to do is say 88, and he knows exactly what you mean. The best rifle in the world, and it's better than a 90 millimeter that we had. And we were briefed on that at OTU in Savannah. They carried, I forgot, either 5 or 6 pounds of very high explosive. And when they went off, it got your attention right off quick. Of course, the shrapnel from the shell itself did some damage. And anyway, we got one of those right between number 1 and number 2 engine on the left-hand side of the wing. And it blew the biggest part of that left wing right off. There was fire, really good, toasted marshmallows, really good. And anyway, we had about 20 seconds to get out of that airplane. That was it. And so my parachute, I think was made right here in Dunkirk. I was told that, but I'm not sure of it. In those days, there was a factory here in Dunkirk that made parachutes, 24-foot diameter parachutes. And I've got a piece of it in my pocket. And anyway, that's a long story too. Anyway, when I got on that airplane, every time I put my parachute, right, you didn't wear it all the time. You had a harness with 2 buckles here. But anyway, I put my parachute right there, the same spot every time. So it didn't take me long, and after that shell exploded and blew that wing almost all the way off in just a couple of seconds. And anyway, I grabbed the parachute as the bailout bell was ringing, and you couldn't miss that. Out there, you could hear it from here to, clear across town. And so I snapped it on my parachute, opened the escape hatch, which was in the floor. You walked on it all the time. Now, anyway, the escape hatch, we wore flak vests and flak helmets. The helmet was just a tin pot. Everybody in the service wore them. The ground forces did, but they had a liner in. Ours had no liner, just sit on your head. Something hit me on the head and blew my helmet off. But anyway, I grabbed the escape hatch handle and snapped it up against the door. The other waist gunner, Marty Labner, was right there beside me. Joe LaRusco was our tail gunner. He was right there too. I went out the escape hatch head first, like we'd been taught to do. We'd never done it before, but anyway, I went out the escape hatch. Marty Lavner later told me that my feet almost kicked him in the face when he went up. Joe LaRusco never made it. We had about 20 seconds from the time that 88 exploded until the plane tipped up sideways. Now the escape hatch is no longer on the floor. It's up here. You're stuck. And four of my crewmates never got out. The pilot, co-pilot, the engineer, and Joe LaRusco back in the tail. They never got out before the airplane tipped up sideways. And so anyway, we didn't know all know that for a few days. But anyway, coming down this parachute there, this piece of this cloth, it was, I got this a little later over there. That's a piece of parachute cloth right there. When it's open, it's the nylon lines down up to your buckles on your harness. And the first time I had ever jumped out, and the last time. Anyway, but it saved my life. This piece right here was my part of my radio operator's parachute, not mine. I left mine hanging on a telephone pole. And anyway, we were in France actually, and south of Cannes, or I can't think of the name of the seaport right close by there. Anyway, in Omaha Beach, maybe 50 miles south of Omaha Beach. And anyway, but we walked from there. The Jerry's picked me up. There was four of them waiting for me when I come down. And we stayed that, and my navigator came in right shortly after me. And we stayed in a French farmhouse that night. The next day went by horse and buggy to another farm, which was a gathering point for PWs. And finally, they had, Jerry's dad didn't have much for transportation. They lacked fuel for one thing, and you'd be surprised how little they had, especially groceries. And if we went for 3 days or 4, we walked every day, and slept in a field, a ditch, or an orchard, or whatever at night, and picking up a few guys along the way. And finally, probably was 40 of us all together when we got to the village of Orbeck, and maybe 20 or 25 miles from where I came down. And in Orbeck, we were fed by the French Red Cross. We stayed in a factory, it had been a cider factory. And there's a big orchard all around, probably 500 apple trees around this building. And they made cider there, which is, the Frenchmen drank more cider than they did wine. But anyway, Al Gallagher was our radio operator, and he was good at it. But he didn't have much common sense sometimes. And Al carried his parachute under his arm for 20 or 25 miles walking down the road. And when we got to Orbeck, these French Red Cross people were feeding us, a couple of men, and the rest were 4 or 5 women. And we gave his parachute. At that time, too, the other 4 guys from our crew that got out, nose gunner and the navigator, bombardier, and the other 4 guys, yeah. Bombardier, tail gunner, nose gunner, can't even take that. Yeah, the bombardier, the navigator was with me, bombardier and the nose gunner got out in front. The radio operator got out, and also the other waist gunner there, Marty Labner. Anyway, finally the 6 of us that got out of that airplane were finally together here at Orbeck. And so I gave this parachute to these French women. They came back with, it was 12 of these pieces of cloth, parachute cloth, just hemmed up on the edge. 2 handkerchiefs for each one of us, and also a scarf about this wide and this long. And the scarves that Jerry took away from us. You could wrap them around the guy's neck, and pull them up tight. So they were considered bad news as far as the Germans are concerned. Anyway, I managed to bring one handkerchief home, and it was at Orbeck. And from there, we went by truck one afternoon, and almost got strafed by English Spitfires. You look right up there, see 8 barrels of 303 machine guns, and it kind of gives you something to think about. Anyway, but we waved these, the 6 of us that had this, we waved this stuff. And that English fighter pilot didn't pull the trigger. He went right by us in this truck, and because he caught up with a German convoy of Red Cross trucks heading the wrong direction, going towards the front, towards the action. They were loaded with explosives, and they had been told that they were going to get shot up, and even though you're not supposed to, according to international law, but you're not supposed to haul explosives in them either, and the juries had them full. They were blowing them up. These fighter pilots were blowing them up fast as they could. And this guy driving the truck we were in was a young German guy. He had been all shot up, was in bad shape. He could drive a truck, and that's about it. We kept hammering on the top of the cab, and there was 26 of us from the Air Force in this box on the back end, and we were segregated from the ground forces, and we hammered on the top of the cab, and he got us turned around, and we got out of there fast, I'll tell you. But anyway, we traveled by truck, by train, a couple times a short distance, and we walked quite a lot of the time. We finally got out of Germany, or out of France, rather, into Holland, and across Holland into Germany and Belgium, and to the village of Limburg, which was a ground force camp, a little temporary camp for ground forces, and it was a pig pen. I got bad news there, and I had the GIs for about a week, and just from that pig pen place. But it was there, I don't know if anybody here or not remembers an American fighter pilot. I can't remember his name, but he came from around Warren, PA, and he had the most victories of any fighter pilot in America. Do everybody remember what his name was? I can't remember his name either. I remember his wingman, and because when we were at Limburg, this ground force, just over the hill was a German airfield. And this fighter pilot and his wingman had a couple of bombs they wanted to drop over there. And the Germans didn't like that idea, and they set up 4 fighter planes, Me-109s, and to take on these 2 American fighter planes. Well, this wingman was protecting his buddy's tail, and he got shot down. And I met him afterwards. He was Lieutenant Fry from Pittsburgh. And anyway, the other guy got shot down eventually, but I can't remember what his name was. He came from around Warren, PA. He had the most victories of any American fighter pilot. But anyways, it's all bad news from there. Really, we finally got to from Limburg, went to Dulag, Luft.
Hey, Lester, right now, we're going to pause for a second because we've got you now in a prisoner of war situation. So you're been captured by the Germans.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk to Dick a little bit because while that is happening there, Dick's in the Pacific, and so I'm going to talk to Dick about, you're working your way towards Okinawa, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, when we first got into the South Pacific, I was in the 6th Marine Division, which was the last one during the last World War II war. And we grouped in the island of Guadalcanal, which was already secured and occupied by American forces. And we were told that we're organizing here to our next. They never told us the island we're going to hit until we finally got to it. And I remember we left Guadalcanal and going for the invasion of Okinawa. And fortunately, this happened on a Easter Sunday morning, which is kind of strange, but that's when we were hitting the beach, and as luck had it, the beach that the military had chosen for us to land in, we had hit no enemy opposition whatsoever. There was nobody on the beach that would give us trouble, and apparently our military people knew that this would have been a safe place to go because the lower end of the island was fortified, and so we got onto the island without any enemy gunfire. And, but then going to Security Island, actually, your infantry divisions are the first ones that meet the enemy opposition. And I was in a engineering company assigned to support the infantry. So as we got into the lower end of the island, which is where all the opposition, Japanese gunfire started, so how much further do you want me to take?
Go ahead, yeah, because you ultimately find yourself getting hit and chaperone, so kind of work our way towards that, Dick.
Well, before my injury, eventually I was hit with a mortar. I was hit by shrapnel from a mortar shell. But before I got into that, we were, as being the backup engineering company for the infantry, there was a call coming through to our people that there was something up the road in the front lines where the infantry wanted the tanks to come over, and there was some obstruction there. So I was assigned to take the bulldozers, which had no armor plate on, and go out and clear what they want. Well, I never got that far before I heard some machine gun snaps come. I don't know how close to my ears they were, but close enough to me to stop the tractor and jump off. And I called back, I said, look, to our people, I said, I left the machine there, but you need an armored bulldozer to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish because of the intense gunfire I experienced. And so they did that. That event was over. But then I think I want to introduce this before I was injured, is that Doug must have been right in that area, because from the island of Okinawa, the ocean, of course, is the ocean of diet, but there was an accumulation of naval vessels that were assisting the infantry penetration of the island, and the infantry called for naval gunfire where they needed it. And we happened to be on the island when this naval gunfire, when I say naval gunfire, well, I'm talking about 16-inch battleship size shells that were being directed into a hill above us for the purpose of, there was enemy opposition in the hill, and there was a lot of growth, a lot of trees and shrubs. Well, they kind of a hill that they were zeroing in on, fortified underground in tunnels and caves. Well, the amazement to hear a 16-inch naval gunfire go over your head, because that's what it was doing. I can't describe how it sounds, but it's kind of an ugly sound. But the impact of that naval gunfire, it stripped all these trees and shrubs, that there was nothing but bare ground there. And that's what the infantry was trying to accomplish. Once all the brush was stripped out, then we encountered, they were still dug in, and the only way we could get the Japanese out is with flamethrowers. And that's what the infantry was doing is, and of course they lost a lot of people in the process, but they would finally get into a machine gun nest that was buried into the hill and then blasted with flamethrowers. And that's how eventually they captured the hill. But the experience of just hearing and seeing the potency of naval gunfire, I was very much impressed with naval gunfire. Nowadays it becomes not as significant. Well, then going forward, that event was over. We were moving from A to B on the ground, and I remember walking across moving forward, walking across the rice paddy where rice was grown. It's kind of a sticky, muddy. So they give us service boots if we need them. So I had a pair of boots on walking through this muddy rice paddy, and we started to get a barrage of mortar fire. Mortar fire is smaller shells, but they're not tossed directly, but they're kind of looped over. But when they impact the ground, they explode. Of course, when the shrapnel is intended to injure you, kill you, whatever. Well, fortunately enough, the mortar that landed 2 feet away from me buried itself into the mud, but the impact did come out with shrapnel. I did get shrapnel hit in both legs, and fortunately, and then of course I was drawn back, and then ended up in eventually flown off the island for treatment. So what the treatment was is that they flew us back to the island. Let me backtrack a little bit. When the Kamikazes were hitting the U.S. naval ships, there was an awful lot of damage done. The Kamikazes, I don't know what they are. They're pilots that are intended to. It's a suicide mission. Their direction was that you take this plane, it's full of bombs, and you don't drop the bombs. You're driving right into the ship, and you with the airplane itself. So naturally, the pilot is killed in the process too. But using that method, there was an awful lot of damage done to the U.S. Navy U.S. Navy ships that were there. So as a result, there was a lot of burned Navy sailors that were on these ships. They were burned badly from the fires that erupted from the bombing. On my evacuation plane after I was injured, they had the plane designated strictly with stretchers to put people on that were injured, and they flew us back to the island of Guam where they had a naval hospital. But I recall the odor on that airplane evacuation from Okinawa to Guam. If anybody smelled burnt flesh in the past, it's ugly. The odor in that airplane from the sailors that were above there that were burned, I'll never forget the odor in that airplane. So anyway, to finish my story, then I spent 6 months in the Naval Hospital. At that point, the war was over. The war ended in August of that year. And I spent the next, from the time I was injured to about more than 6 months before they discharged me from one naval hospital to another. But I was finally discharged with with a disability that eventually I overcame. And that's why I'm still here.
So there's Lester. He's been shot down. He's in Europe. He's in a prisoner of war camp. You know, here's Dick, who Marine, Okinawa, having these naval bombs go over his head. Ultimately, he gets hit and has to come out of the war. Both of these folks had Purple Hearts. And you're on a Navy ship just floating out in the Pacific. You know, signing autographs and, but to disabuse that thinking, what was happening in your world?
Well, Dick has set the stage very well. That, as I said, I had gone to gunfire control school, which was to learn how to aim and shoot 5-inch 38s, twin 5-inch 38s. That's a shell that's 5 inches in diameter and 38 times that length. It can throw a projectile that weighs about 60 pounds, up to 7 or 8 miles. Our basic job, however, off Okinawa, was to protect the ships that were throwing the big guns in. They were 15 or 20 miles out, and they fired 16-inch guns and 12-inch guns and so forth. And the shell in that 16-inch gun, which goes by you like a freight train, sounds like a train going by. They tell me. I was never on that end of it. But the result was that that weighed about 2,000 pounds. But our job was to be to protect the fleet. And so we were stationed about 5 miles off the coast, and our job was to shoot down the Kamikazes when they came over. My job, I've been transferred aboard ship. I'd never had any experience other than in training back in San Diego, but the fellow that had held the job had just been transferred back home on a hardship leave, and I was put into the turret where you did the aiming. You were 87 feet above the water, above the bridge, so that you could aim all 3 of the 5-inch 38 guns. And I remember going up for the first time there, and the officer who was in there turned around and said, "Hey, who the hell are you?" So I introduced myself, and he was a little nervous that he had a gunner that had never done anything before. However, the way those guns worked is that they had gunner's mates who loaded the guns, and they had pointers and directors like myself, whose job was to aim the guns. And then you had an officer aboard, and he was the one who closed the firing key. And inside our little turret, you had one person who ran the rangefinder. So as you were focusing on the target, he would be moving, cranking this information in, and it would go by electromechanical device down to the computer, which was bigger than these 2 tables put together. And I would be cranking the pointer, and the pointer was the one that made the crosshair go this way. It wasn't anyway. And then the trainer next to us cranked there, and he had the crosshair that went that way. And when all 3 of those crosshairs came together on the target, which was about 5 miles away, then the officer would press the key and decide which of the 3 sets of guns would be used. Well, anyway, we were quite successful some of the time, but when we weren't completely successful, they did get into some of the bigger ships, and there were some carriers that were lost, and no battleships that went down, but a lot of casualties, and they went home badly burned, particularly the ones that were on carriers, because as the Kamikaze went down, he would go right through the decks and down into and then you had planes that were already fueled and ready to go, and when they started burning, it was an incinerator, and There was no time to put down lifeboats and that sort of thing. There wasn't enough lifeboats to go around anyway. It didn't make any difference. And one good story about it, and the one Navy story I love to tell, is that we were in position this one day, and we were the lead ship, and there were two others behind us, all three destroyers. That's, by the way, why I wrote Tin Can Sailor. And the reason they call them tin cans, by the way, is because the armor plate is so thin. If you were hit with a torpedo, it would just usually go right through, blow up on the way. But anyway, we were firing at this kamikaze, and we wounded him, and he couldn't make it all the way out to the fleet. So he decided to take us with him if he could, and he came around from behind and very low. The Navy was a very segregated service. The blacks were given all the worst jobs around. They were either captain's mess boys, or they were down in the engine room or whatever. And the captain's mess boy, a young man named Strobel from New Orleans, was firing a gun on the fantail of the ship, which was a 20-millimeter gun. And those were the guns that you probably remember from the movies, where the guy was strapped in and another guy was putting canisters of ammunition on, kind of gun. Well, when this kamikaze came in, he came in very low and from behind, and the two ships behind us couldn't shoot at him without shooting at one another. And we couldn't depress our big guns enough because ours was shooting out this way. And the only gun that was left to shoot that had any chance of knocking the kamikaze out was the 20-millimeter gun manned by Strobel. Strobel was alone by then. The guy that put canisters of ammunition on had gotten the hell out of there, which was understandable. The plane was coming in very close at that point. But Strobel kept firing until he ran out of ammunition, and he blew up that kamikaze so close to us that parts of the ship, parts of the plane hit the rear of our ship. And he went, that killed the kamikaze, but it didn't kill us, we were delighted to say. And 3 months later, when the war was over, we were in Leyte Gulf off the Philippines, and the captain read a commendation to Strobel. He said, "Strobel, you got anything to say?" He said, "Yes, sir, Captain. I ain't no goddamn hero. I just couldn't get the hell out of there." And it was true. He was back then, the guy who was supposed to unhook him had gone, you know. And just one quick finish on this one, because a few years ago, a friend of mine invited me to go over with a bunch of his friends who had been caught in the Battle of the Bulge. And when I got over there, I found out I was the only former Navy guy with all these Army guys. And of course, the Battle of the Bulge, a lot of them had been captured, became prisoners of war, and many died there. But when they found out I'd been in the Navy, they said, "Yeah, 3 hot meals a day and a bed to sleep in every night. You call that? We're freezing our ass off in a foxhole, you know." And I would tell them the Strobel story, and they start to laugh, and they say, "That's just what happened to us. We couldn't get the hell out of there." So that's the definition of a hero when next time you hear it.